Welcome students to this PowerPoint lecture on Dr. Frederica de Laguna. This lecture should be viewed in connection with the lecture on the Kaciamak tradition, specifically the marine Kaciamak tradition, which is what Dr. de Laguna first defined, and I separated this out because it's important for us to understand the process of how archaeology works, and Frederica de Laguna, is one of the famous people of Cook Inlet, and we should know about her. De Laguna was an archaeologist and anthropologist at Bryn Mawr University in Philadelphia, and became one of the most well-known archaeologists of her time. She started out, of course, as a graduate student, and this is where our interest is, because she did some of the first problem-oriented archaeology, not only in Cook Inlet, but maybe some of the first serious problem-oriented archaeology in North America. Archaeology tends to be characterized as the finding of interesting things. We can fault Indiana Jones for that. I love Indiana Jones and I love the movies, but it doesn't really portray the scientific aspect of archaeology, posing questions and then using field work to try to answer those questions. De Laguna, less famous than Indiana Jones, but in a way much more fascinating, did some of that very first field work, problem-oriented field work, in the 1930s right here in Cook Inlet. From that, she published what is still one of the most important archaeology books in Alaska and maybe North America, The Archaeology of Cook Inlet, Alaska, which she wrote in 1934. What makes it problem-oriented is that she formed a hypothesis. She formed a hypothesis and then used field work to try to answer that question that she posed. In the 1930s, she had two pieces of information. One was Mason's 1928 article in a University of Pennsylvania museum journal titled "A Remarkable Stone Lamp from Alaska." Specifically, that lamp was found at Kenai, at the mouth of the Kenai River in Alaska. It's remarkable is an understatement. I believe it's said to weigh about 50 or 60 pounds, pecked out of granite, carefully pecked out of granite, with this human figure in the middle. The lamp, of course, would be filled with seal oil, and it would have a moss wick strung out in front of the face, in front of the figurine. So when the moss was lit, the light would reflect off of the face. A remarkable artifact, certainly worthy of an Indiana Jones movie, but also an artifact that is typical of Eskimo-speaking peoples. Yupik, Inupiaq, and others. Stone lamps are associated with Yupik and Inupiaq, particularly in tundra areas where there isn't wood to burn. And seal lamps and seal oil lamps provide both light and heat and cooking. So they were important in that regard, in the same sense that a fireplace in the boreal forest area provides light and heat for cooking. So it's unusual to find them in forested areas, and they tend to be identified with Eskimo-speaking peoples. About the same time, in the early 1930s, Cornelius Osgood did research in Cook Inlet. In 1931, he visited Kenai, Iliamna, Tyonek, and other areas, interviewing elders, and we've talked about this book. It's one of the core books for this class. and eventually published it in 1937. That's what's viewed on the reprint of it is viewed on the right. However, he was publishing other articles in the early 1930s based on what he found out. And one of the things he found out is that the indigenous people of Cook Inlet, at least above Kachemak Bay, were Dena'ina Athabascans, related to the interior and the Athabascan cultures that stretch all the way through northern Canada. So, here is, I should say as an aside, of course, the people already knew they were Athabascan-speaking people, but the outside world didn't know it. So she formed a hypothesis, and it went something like this. An Eskimo-speaking or Eskimo-like culture preceded the Dena'ina Athabascans in Cook Inlet. It meets the requirement of a scientific hypothesis because it has a yes or no answer. But she didn't speculate on the answer, as a lot of previous archaeologists may have done. She formulated a field project to try to find sites where there was Eskimo-like cultures with lamps and harpoons and similar types of artifacts below and above which would be a Dena'ina Athabascan-like culture archaeologically, and in that manner she could prove her hypothesis. If she didn't find that, then her hypothesis would have been negated and would have been wrong. She came to Anchorage at the height of the Depression, a young single woman, alone her first year, and simply started asking around. Does anyone here know of any sites? Any old sites? Know of lamps? So this is 1930s Anchorage. There wasn't a lot of interest in archaeology and prehistory at that time. And it was looking like a dead end. But she knew she wanted to go down Cook Inlet. She wanted to go down toward Kenai and wherever else it would take her. She hooked up with a guy named Jack Shields. Jack Shields turned out to be a decent guy. She made a deal that she would work on his boat. He had I believe it was a fishing boat that he was taking down to Homer. She would work on his boat as a deckhand. If he would stop every once in a while, and she could go on shore and put a shovel in the ground and look for sites that might help answer her hypothesis. So down they came. Down they came Cook Inlet. I sort of envision it romantically as something like the African Queen. Down they come Cook Inlet, like an African river. Jack Shields is Humphrey Bogart and Frederica de Laguna is Katharine Hepburn, but I'm probably fantasizing way too much. Down they come, and she goes on shore periodically. I have her field notes. They're very interesting. But as she goes down, she is not finding the kind of site she's looking for. She's finding a lot of good information. Much of it, all of it, went into the subsequent publication, The Archaeology of Cook Inlet. But she was not finding the exact site that she was looking for. Finally, they get all the way down to Kachemak Bay. And she goes on shore at Yukon Island. Here's a map of Kachemak Bay. Homer is right here, and this is Yukon Island where the arrow points. And she put a spade in the ground, and she found what she interpreted correctly as Dena'ina above and an Eskimo-like culture below. She named that culture the Kachemak tradition, and it's a name we still use today. She affirmed her hypothesis. She in the writing of her book, she described the two cultures. Here is the original copy of her book, a 1934 edition. In the left and inside is one of the plates. The original, by the way, this edition appeared in my mailbox here at the college one day. I don't know who sent it to me. They must have thought I would appreciate it, and I do appreciate it. And now I can show you what the cover looks like and the book looks like for you. It was subsequently reprinted in the 1970s by the Anchorage Historical Museum, I believe. That one has a blue cover, but it looks almost identical. It has, I think, a new preface to it, but other than that, it's the reprint of the original book. And you can occasionally find it in used bookstores, although I'm pretty sure that even that version is worth quite a bit today. If you get a chance to look at one in the library, it's certainly worth looking at. It's a classic. Here's Dr. de Laguna later in her life. This is 1993. She gave a talk in Homer. I've had the chance to meet her 3 times, I believe it is. I took my kids. There's my daughter Kristen and my son Eric, and peeking around there is my younger son Peter, and there I am on the right. She had her sign a copy of my book, of her book, and it was an honor to meet her. Very interesting woman. She, at that stage in her life, somebody asked her what she was doing. She was in her 80s then, and she said, well, I'm working on something like 2 books and several articles. She's the kind of person that found her direction in life, found her purpose in life, and even though she retired from teaching and from active work as an anthropologist, she never quit being an anthropologist. And probably to her last year in life, she was active in doing what she loved. She had to overcome a lot of things, as we all do, but in her case, one of them was she was dyslexic. And you can see it in her field notes, and it's interesting that at that time, in her younger years, in the 30s, 40s, dyslexia was not known to be an organic phenomena as it is today. It was equated with not being very bright. So she could have let that defeat her, but she wanted to be an archaeologist and she wanted to be a professor, and she worked very, very hard at doing that and became one of the best in history. We're honored here in Cook Inlet to have had her as one of the founding fathers of anthropology. She worked very closely with native groups. She later worked among the Tlingit, particularly at Yakutat, but she worked all over the north, and her life is definitely worth learning about. Dr. Frederica de Laguna defines the Kachemak tradition.